Blessed love and peace. Here's another joint. I just talked for like half an hour, literally 3 seconds ago, 20 seconds ago. And I'm sharing an addenda from earlier today. I did a Instagram reel, REEL, for the first time actually, with a comment on it. I don't know how it works. I don't know the details of it, so I'm sharing this verbal rendering of the same kind of message accordingly, because this is an established methodology of communication here. So here it is. So actually, it's a response to a video clip of Harry Belafonte of blessed memory, speaking about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King II of blessed memory, and him relaying one of the last conversations that he has with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King II before he is killed. And what Harry Belafonte communicates is that Martin Luther King Jr. of blessed memory communicates concern about the successes of the civil rights movement and the anticipation of laws being passed to include people of African ancestry within American society and the American system. But at the same time, him becoming aware of the extreme disadvantage of assimilating within American society, because observing and becoming increasingly aware of how thoroughly corrupt American society is beyond the racism, but just looking at the fundamentals of American society at that time, nearly 50 years ago. No, what am I talking about? Nearly 60 years ago, over half a century ago. This is what is communicated. What Harry Belafonte says is MLK mentions that American society is it has lost its, and this is nearly 60 years ago, has lost its moral fiber, its moral compass, its moral vision, and that much of the message and guidance is based upon selfishness and greed. I think was specifically one of the words included within what Harry Belafonte articulates, but something to that effect. The motivations are are selfish, and emphasizing superiority, and conquest, and these premises that are very unsustainable and corrupting, and that lead to what is described as Sodom and Gomorrah. That extreme amount of corruption, and the metaphor that is utilized is Martin Luther King describing himself leading black people into a burning house, and that so much effort has been made for black people to have standing within the house, that there has been an obliviousness to the fact that the house is burning. Beyond just the racism and the injustices of racism, the house itself is without moral foundation and beyond functionality. That was 60 years ago. Now, people might say, well, that's just what's going on today. No. What we are at today is the late stages of that. And it's like the house has been burning for the past 60 years. And people have ignored it. People have avoided it. Some people have heeded and made left and made adjustments and accordingly. But by and large, people have been ignoring it and pretending that things are usual. And the house has been burning. And now, it seems, increasingly number of people are recognizing that the house is burning. And it's not just the top floors at this point, that it's the walls and the pillars are burning. And we're not trying to do a doomsday thing. We're not trying to do a hype thing about like, oh, yeah, Babylon fall. We're not even saying that. just speaking very factly, very calmly and rationally, that's what is articulated 60 years ago. And this is from a leadership, and there's a point for me sharing this at the moment, a tangible point, a productive and solution-based point. This is from the leadership, and it's beneficial to recognize that at that time, 60 years ago, most black people don't have an awareness of how government works, of how businesses work, how society works, because there's been little education. There's been little access to those rooms and hallways where these decisions are made, where the decisions are discussed, where the decisions are shared. There's been woeful legal-based segregation and apartheid that prevents that type of knowledge. And so much of the emphasis of the civil rights movement is to have access to gain that knowledge without knowing what that knowledge is of. It's just a matter of like, we want what you have, and we want what we think other people of other societies have, without knowing what is actually going on. There are a few people amongst people of African ancestry at that time who have an awareness. Very many of those people are already gone. They've already sold themselves out. And I don't mean, I'm trying to speak very candidly and succinctly, but have already become like woefully leveraged to be able to tell others what it is, what's going on. And because they know if they do, it's not going to do much anyways, and then they're going to be taken out. So kinfolk many people of African ancestry have just been quiet, and played their role or whatever else. A few have had the knowledge and made moves accordingly, left society in additionally. So Martin Luther King is one of the few who have learned that process, learned eventually the actuality of what society is, and the level of corruption and unsustainability at that time, 60 years ago. So many people from that time, within the past half century since that time, have jumped into the opportunities, the equal opportunities, of assimilation, going into schools, getting jobs, buying houses in other districts, sending children to school, and playing the role of moving on up without being mindful that the house all the while is burning, moving up in a burning house. Talking heads. 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't mean me making jokes, but these are pop cultural references that I'm mixing in like a DJ. So that's what black people have been doing. Many black people have been doing for the past half century, since affirmative action and other things like that. Taking these opportunities to get money, because there's been too much to give away. America is being extremely rich off of the exploits after World War II. So there's plenty to go around. And black people have, by and large, not all, but many, well, I won't say the majority, but many refugees. Many black people have just jumped into that without questioning, without looking, without caring. And sipping on bubbly, and living the life, and just wanting to classify as a millionaire. And we've made it. And in that process, losing self and becoming increasingly precariously situated amidst the geopolitics and residing in a burning house. The creator of the Boondocks, his name escapes me, gave a speech in the 2000s, about 20 years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago, talking about black people at that time. This might have been actually over 20 years ago, like 2002, giving a speech about how black people have used up black people's credibility. He sets it in a domestic sense of like at that point, 20 years ago, white people don't care about black people at that point, because black people have used up the race card. And I'm not a conservative. I'm not a Republican. This, that, and the other. Okey doke. saying black people need to pull them ourselves up by the bootstrap, but I'm being factual, and I'm referencing people being factual, that the sympathies and playing that victim role, and additionally, is played out. It's gone. The only reason why it seems like it's still there is because people, the liberals, invite black folk to just to be slaves to liberals and get juiced for however much liberals can get out of it, and then buy. But that whole trope is played out. So not only the author of the Boondocks talks about that in the context of the domestic society of the United States. White people don't care about black people suffering at this point, because white people are like, yo, I need to make money myself. I need to feed myself. And you've had this, you've had that, you've had this, you had that. So whatever. Don't care any further. Don't come to me with that. And that's not being racist. That's just being factual. The expectation for other people to care about oneself, get off that. What? All right. Not only that, though, the things that El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz mentions in going to Mecca and going to Egypt and talking things, saying that the world knows our struggle and respects our struggle. That was over 60 years ago. And that's not the situation today. Can't say the same thing, because black people have aggregately, as a whole, bought into the system of the United States, accepting affirmative action, accepting all the tokens and the cash, the monies, and the benefits from American society that American society has gained through continuing to rape and pillage this land, this continent, as well as rape and pillage other lands, and then give some of the scraps to black people. So that when black people go around saying Black Lives Matter, quote unquote, which is itself bullshit, the whole thing, and black folk know that, the real ones know that, it doesn't hold anything around the world, genuinely. Young people might jump on it because what else is there? But it doesn't hold credibility with with the real ones outside the United States. Because the real ones say, wait, black folk, aren't you in the military? Aren't you the ones who was bombing so-and-so over there and taking pride in it and getting benefits and living a comfortable lifestyle? Living in your big house and your big truck and your big TV screens? What you talking about now? You mad because what? So that's what's happened over the past few centuries, or for the past few generations, the past 50 years. That credibility of sufferation is lost, is gone. So anyways, that's part of the negative. That's part of, wow, I've gone on and on about that one. Maybe I'm just venting right here, getting some things off my chest. So that's the point at this moment for that specifically. And yet and still, black folk are still attached to the United States and still attached to the burning house. And it's ridiculous to see black prominent or well-known, I won't say prominent, just well-known, because where is the black leadership today? Leadership doesn't have to be like celebrities or well-known people, but it's a different paradigm these days. So what we observe is that there are people who are put in positions of leadership from the system. Comedians who are supposed to be truth speakers, who are not truth speakers, who are puppets of the entertainment industry. Even those, I'm not calling out names because the point of this is not hating or whatever else. Speaking facts. That's not the leadership. Those aren't the talking points to guide and uplift black community, black people. The comedians aren't doing it. Athletes aren't doing it. Actors are not doing it. Hip hop is not doing it. Business people aren't doing it. Professionals aren't doing it. Hustlers, people on the streets aren't doing it. Gangsters aren't doing it. The religious leaders, quiet as kept and keeping it facts, ain't doing it. Because all these types of leaders are attached to the American system, the burning house. There's a point to this. We'll get into it. So that's the state of affairs at this moment. So when we talk about solutions, it's not a matter of how to situate oneself or one's collective in an increasingly advantageous position within the establishment of a burning house. It's a matter of having a knowledge about the world, about history, about discipline, and the spirit realm particularly, to discern, okay, what is the prudent path through that navigates through the conditions today and continuing. So what we share in the IG joint just earlier this evening is an insight, which is this. At that same time, 60 years ago, whilst very few people of African ancestry have a knowledge about civilization and have the ability to use that knowledge in a way that genuinely benefits people of African ancestry within the United States as well as within the diaspora, few number of real ones with that knowledge and the ability to utilize that knowledge in a genuine way know enough to know that it's not going to happen by hoopla. It's not happening at that moment 60 years by a popular movement. It's not going to be televised or otherwise. It has to be very quiet. It has to be very concentrated, and it has to be effective. And ain't no guarantees in the whole thing. And what does all this mean? Those who have the knowledge about how the world works, the formality of how things are done, government processes and negotiations, diplomacy and business, trade, technology as well, developments in that respect, anticipations, but also the underbelly, the secret societies, the satanic influences, the devilish hand amidst all the conditions, as well as the heavenly hand. Have a knowledge about that, a genuine knowledge. So to make decisions that are real, not just for that moment, but for the next 7 generations. At that moment, 60 years ago, there are a few number, less than the talented tenth. It may be estimated. Save the 1%ers. But it's enough for that moment. And there's an effective blueprint, perhaps other than a hard, fast blueprint. And in actuality, it may be recognized that there are multiple blueprints. That the effective leadership, this leadership that has the knowledge and the honesty, integrity to guide the Black community from that moment to where we are and continuing in an optimal way. There are a number of blueprints. They're not public. They're not big name or whatever else per se, the blueprints. But they're shared very prudently, very carefully, knowing how the influences are, how the temptations, the corruptions, the violence, the threats, and otherwise exist. So it's a matter of a lot of it being unspoken, because that's one of the effective ways of guiding past those adverse conditions. But it being intentional and it being organized. Kinfolk, like the sentient underground, the intellectual underground, whereby this leadership identifies what the needs are within the next few generations. What does our next generation need to know? Maybe it's finance, maybe it's government and law, maybe it's health, but particularly finance, government, and law, and maybe some social aspect of that, to deal with the malaise, to avoid the susceptibilities to intoxications and quote-unquote addictions, or attachments to alcohol, drugs, and promiscuity and otherwise. So what's the knowledge that the next generation needs to guide its peers and succeeding generations to the next stage. How do kinfolk get that education? How do kinfolk get that knowledge? Um, what do we know? What can we provide in house? And what are we going to have to um, um, contract, or what are we going to have to um, arrange outside of our immediate fold, either at HBCUs, at PWIs, and through other means. And knowing what those immediate needs are for that generation, for the next 1, 2, 3 generations, preparing children to do that, to go through those steps of acquiring that knowledge, the things that leadership already knows, and the things that the leadership knows that it doesn't know, but that it knows that the next generation needs to know. Do you get that? Preparing children from a young age to do that, to walk that path. Knowing ain't no guarantee. There's certain things that we can help control environment for students at a younger age, but again, eventually the students have to get beyond the greenhouse and have to get into the world and continue to learn and navigate on one's own with whatever discipline has been instilled beforehand as much as possible. And we continue to support from a further distance. But and some kinfolk go wayward. Some kinfolk become betrayals, and some kinfolk toe the line and might get snuffed early. Some kinfolk might be able to make it a ways and teach and build and continue on. That's the nature, and that's the guidance that our elders share with us from preceding generations, 1, 2, 3 generations till today. So what am I saying? Point is, at this moment, at that time, 60 years ago, we have elders, preceding generations, who have a knowledge about what is needed and how to facilitate it as much as possible and prepare children, students to progress along those paths. And it's not the athletes, it's not the celebrities, it's not the people who are well known. Those kinfolk are too attached to the system, the corruptions, the temptations. That's not the kinfolk who are leading it, any kinfolk, black, white, or otherwise, in a healthy direction. It's the kinfolk whose names are lesser known, many of whom may be vilified or ostracized or stigmatized. But continue on. Continue to learn, and continue to learn what the next generation needs to know, and prepare the next generation to gain that knowledge and to continue building and prepare the next generation. Modest, humble, trod. So in the first generations, that might have been the emphasis within law and government and business. And then the generation after that may be increasingly in the realms of health, recognizing the increasing concerns of diabetes, AIDS, heart disease, cancer, and other things. And so, okay, learn further about health, remember those things, Dr. Sebi, and additionally. And learning further about the world, getting off the plantation, getting further perspective, building relationships and diplomacy with other nations, with people of African ancestry being other than a distinct, recognized, officially recognized sovereignty within the UN system and world system. Establishing diplomatic rapport as sovereign as possible, if other than as an official sovereign entity, through agencies. Trans-Africa Forum being one, other types of black-owned businesses or ventures, professional organizations, and otherwise, not being emissaries of American institutions, but being increasingly autonomous. Du Bois is an example of this, even though the NAACP eventually gets co-opted. But those are some examples of the type of diplomacy that is curated through the leadership, the roots-based leadership of people of African ancestry in preceding generations, continually preparing the next generation for further steps, to be able to travel, to visit directly at young stages as students, without being military, without being corporate raiders or otherwise, without being on vacation, but learning, building relationships, building cooperations with kinfolk organizations and entities from other cultures. Those are part of the elements of the solution and the blueprints. It's a collective of blueprints because it's other than just one. And it's how those blueprints coalesce and support each other through this moment, at this moment. So there's other things to be shared in this respect, but trying to think the original joint, when we begin this joint on. Addendum. Wow. Oh, I was talking about the quote from Martin Luther King Jr. So, again, Martin Luther King, and Harry Belafonte, who is part of many of the institutions I've already described in the past few moments, that's part of the continuum, one of the architects of these blueprints. And there are many others: professionals, laborers, activists, convicts, expatriates, and otherwise, who are architects of this blueprint, each one emphasizing different components of it, some being holistic, and again, amidst the differences, there being confluences and support, mutual support. So all that being said, the point at the moment, I keep saying with the point, consideration at the moment is continuation. It's what we suggest a solution, what we are cultivating a solution is, again, knowledge of self, discipline of self, love of self. And perhaps the next one from that is building of self. Solidifying the domicile where we reside, determining where that domicile is, determining where we plant our fruit trees, not just our vegetation and our crops from year in to year out, but where we plant our trees, whether it's banana, pineapple, apple, pear, cherry, whatever it is, the trees that we invest in to grow for years and years and years and continue to produce fruit afterwards. Where do we invest ourselves along those lines? And literally, physically, where do we invest ourselves to trust those fruits to be shared in a prudent way? So basically, two options are staying on this land, and another one is repatriating, whether that repatriation is to Africa or to another location. For those who choose to stay here, recognize this is a burning house. And rather than just rotely attaching oneself to the bandwagon of this burning house, it's a matter of the very intricate diplomacy of toting the line of conventionality and maintaining those pretenses or premises, but at the same time making the necessary preparations for life after the dissolution. Much of that is having a knowledge set of the necessities within life and how to procure those necessities. That's utilities, that's food, shelter, as well as social order, how to work with others, and have a compact, how to settle differences, how to hold leadership accountable, how to work with other communities, rivals, enemies, antagonists, and otherwise. We've shared insight along those lines on numerous occasions. We emphasize family, clans, bands, villages, and land. At the moment, we're focusing on residential co-op 10 families for basic practical necessities comprehensively, and building from this from this security. And that's just a very and immediate practical and immediate focus uh, from where we are at this moment. So um, it's a work in progress. All things happen according to the grace of the Most High Elohim. Um, hmm. One thing I personally have yet to mention in terms of solution, and this again, all of what I said is specifically applied to people of African ancestry, but it applies to people of all ethnicities. Um, there might be different variants of emphasis and degree of necessity, depending upon the different ethnic and religious communities. But it's all the joint is generally applicable to all communities. Again, one thing, particularly for people of African ancestry, but all people of all ethnicities, to be mindful of and to consider is establishing an effective embassy within one's homeland, so that even when a kinfolk and a collective of kinfolk abstain from repatriating, at least having a direct diplomatic tie to the homeland, because that's part of the necessity of rootedness, of anchor, of support, to continue in negotiating and navigating the interactions within this continent, within this land of the Western Hemisphere, as well as within the world and geopolitical conditions. Uh, so that's one thing at the very least, if not repatriating directly, then establishing an embassy uh, that maintains direct interaction and relations, communication with kinfolk on one's own homeland, uh, and continue to build. That helps in negotiations and exchange and bartering and otherwise. Um, wow, people are tripping. There's hardly any cars out here, but like the cars that are out here are honking. We're having a gentle winter storm at this moment. There's been a lot of snow flurries, a fair amount of accumulation, not a lot. It has yet to be over like 20 centimeters. Um, but it has been snowy the whole time. Visibility has been comparatively modest, been gray skies throughout the day. Um, roads are still covered with snow, even though they've been plowed regularly, and it's not that bad, particularly for people who are used to Ohio. But at the same time, it's an excuse for people to trip a wee bit. So, say la vie. So that's some of it. That's what I've shared. That's what I've got to say about that. That's the British Gump. The British Gump. That's what I got to say about that. One other thing from a previous joint in the past few days about like adjustments of migrations and ethnic communities, religious communities. I was talking about the adjustments here on the Western Hemisphere. I was talking about adjustments in Asia, East Asia. I think I might have mentioned South Asia as well. Might have talked somewhat about Europe, maybe lightweight. Maybe talk somewhat about Africa, but I think I talked particularly about the Western Hemisphere. But I'll add another joint to this, which is the Mediterranean. When we talk about Israel, Palestine, and Arabs, and Jews, and Muslims, Christians, and additional kinfolk. Wow, I heard a joke too. I might share that joke too. Here we go. Later, maybe. One consideration amidst all the adjustments within geopolitics and additionally is in the Middle East, first of all, our frame of reference, the way we categorize things, very simply geographically, is that there's the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean includes all of the land that is adjacent to the Mediterranean Sea, the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea. And then the land that is south of that is Africa, or Al-Qabalan. The land that is east of that is Asia. The land that is north of that is Europe. And the land that is west of that, i.e. the Western Hemisphere, is Mayanterrania, i.e. the Western Hemisphere. Those are the general areas, the 5 areas of civilization. Amidst the 5 areas of civilization, there is somewhat further specification when we look at ethnicity and quasi-religiosity. Particularly in Asia, there's the designation between East Asia and South Asia. Basically, the line being drawn between the Mekong River and the Huang River, actually the Yangtze River, and my pronunciation is wanting. So that's where the line is drawn between East Asia and South Asia. The line between, well, I won't get into all the details, but that's one distinction within the area of East Asia, or Asia, east of the Mediterranean. Then, within the Mediterranean, there is the Western Mediterranean, and there is the Eastern Mediterranean. It's always a challenge to discern where to draw the lines. And I don't mean that to be lighthearted about that, because obviously people are dying over that at this moment. Not only people are dying, people are being tortured and experiencing painful, excruciating deaths and suffering because of the difficulty of drawing these lines. All of it belongs to God. All the lines, all the boundaries, all the land belongs to God. All the land belongs to God. The lines are I won't get into that realm, but so what we do is, I'm having to remember this specifically. Basically, from Iberia, tracing the Mediterranean, the extended shores of the Mediterranean, all the way through the Black Sea, around the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, the Aral Sea. I didn't mention that before, but that's part of it. The Aral Sea, and then circumambulating the shoreline, the southern shoreline. Just the water that runs into those waters, that being effectively all the way up to the Sinai, where Egypt exists. All of that being effectively the western part of the Mediterranean. And then the other part of that, from South Asia, India, into, essentially, it's actually west of the Indus River. So elements of Pakistan, Iran, Persia, through Tigris, Euphrates, into the Arabian Peninsula, up to the mountains before the waters run into the Black Sea, and additionally, and then up to the Sinai again. It also continues along the north coast of Africa, and again, there's an overlap with that, so there's that element. But anyways, that's what we recognize as Western Mediterranean. So, and we can recognize there being very different civilizational paradigms and cultures within those geographies. The Western, did I say Western or Eastern for that second part? It should be Eastern, if I didn't say that otherwise. It's late, we're past. Wow. Wait a minute. Oh, I've done 2 of these joints. That's why. Blah, blah. We're past, or an hour past midnight. I started this before midnight thinking, oh, it's before midnight. And now we're an hour past nearly. Wow. Okay, yeah, let's wrap this up. Not only do we got to go to sleep, but we're supposed to do some work first before we go to sleep. Blah, blah. Self-abuse. And I only blame myself. Finishing this up. East and West Mediterranean. The western part of it, again, Iberia. It includes Italia, Greece, all the way up through Turkey. Um, those are the names known today, and then circumambulating around essentially like Eastern Europe, from around the Danube, the Volga, all the way to the ROC with the Sirdarya River and the Amudarya River. That being significantly Christian, whether it's Orthodox, Roman Catholic, or otherwise, but that being just a predominant thing. Now, obviously, it's not exclusive and absolute, but that being a predominant paradigm, and particularly within Turkey and the further region around Turkey, it's not specifically or even predominantly Christian, but in the general region, in that vicinity, that's the predominant paradigm. Then on the other side, again, it's not absolute, but when we talk about Persia, when we talk about Tigris and Euphrates, when we talk about the Arabian Peninsula, when we talk about the area immediately south, the coastal areas immediately south of the Mediterranean, that is predominantly an Arabic or an Arab Muslim paradigm, particularly a Muslim paradigm. We get into another conversation when we talk about the ethnic components of Arab versus other ethnicities within the Ummah. But that Eastern Mediterranean region being predominantly a Muslim paradigm. And then there's the experience of Israel and Judaism, the children of Israel, in the middle of these, geographically, particularly. So, what is observed is the further establishment of these regions along those lines of the predominant paradigms that are described, rather than as specific nations per se, but increasingly as increasingly immediate provinces and metropolises, sovereign provinces and metropolises, with increased amount of travel within intra-regional travel and relations within these regions, amidst the similar cultural and religious protocols, precepts, and laws. And then the area further north, being increasingly Christian, continuing increasingly Christian, and settling as such. The question of Israel is another topic, a whole nother topic. Yet that question is further effectively solved when the surrounding conditions are increasingly steady and tranquil and peaceful, prosperous. That's what we're going to share for this moment. There's much further to share, much further that's been shared recently through other conversations. And again, the intention is not to start doing these joints up again and doing these things for hours long. And additionally, we've got other projects that are priority at the moment. So we have a duty to attend to these accordingly and complete these in a proficient manner, God willing. So that being communicated, we give all thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim. Blessed love and peace in Rastafari. And speaking of Rastafari as well, before we go, His Majesty Haile Selassie I, when we talk about leadership having a vision, leadership having a blueprint, and working to complete a blueprint, His Majesty Haile Selassie I, the establishment of the African Union, the works of Pan-Africanism, of the different leadership, even within the United States, no name, or I won't say no name, that's somewhat derogatory, but low-key leadership of the Black community that few people have heard of, organizations few people have heard of, even Black intelligentsia being aware of, having this diplomacy and having this knowledge, having this relationship, and having this lineage, ongoing lineage. His Majesty Haile Selassie I provides valuable guidance for constructing such blueprints, for implementing such blueprints, even for adjusting the blueprints that he writes and that he manifests, adjusting the blueprints for today's circumstances and today's priorities and needs. That adjustment to today's conditions is strengthened through studying what His Majesty actually does. The blueprints His Majesty actually writes and implements. My knowledge of that is modest. The autobiography of His Majesty Haile Selassie is very valuable. There are many talks, those that he authors, those that he simply shares. His travels are a strong indication. Who he meets with before being in exile, after being in exile, the different stages of his reign within Ethiopia reveal this blueprint, written, unwritten, spoken, and unspoken, earthly and heavenly. Studying it, reading it, studying it, practicing it, makes us increasingly knowledgeable and attuned with it, supported within it, part of that blueprint, as we bring blueprints together and are those bridges, those confluences. We find other leaders that share blueprints. Kwame Nkrumah, El-Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz, William Edward Bernard Dubois, Marcus Garvey, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Booker T. Washington, Booker Taliaferro Washington, A. Philip Randolph, Martin Luther King II, Stokely Carmichael, Huey B. Newton. Not all agree immediately and absolutely with each other. That's okay. It's unnecessary. The blueprints are valuable, and the blueprints are related. The blueprints are intrinsically mutually supportive. That's within the Black community. Every ethnicity has those. And I'm saying, for going to a slew of the names, my repertoire is comparatively modest. I can say names, but again, I'm supposed to be signing off. What we can do, what I can do, and what we can do at this moment is invite kinfolk to look at the 124 legends of the world that we share. Many of the leaders that construct these blueprints in the past century are included within that list of 124, 124 legends of the world. And many of those leaders of the past century who are absent from that list of 124 legends are students within those lineages and continuing the blueprints that the ancient teachers already shared before us. So that being said, again, we give all thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim, and blessed love and peace of Rastafari.